solidity, changelessness, security, these things can seem like very big things. And in the way we've been exploring them, they appear mostly in the realm of reason, where reason is presented to us as something that's established, finished, complete, secure, no risks where reason is concerned, logic, as Wittgenstein says, there are no surprises in logic, right? That's a picture of the kind of self that we want, one that's consistent, coherent, fits together well, has unified, rational plans, in which there are no internal stresses or strains, right? And that's the sort of the ethical self is often presented as one governed by rules like that, right? So the rules of good behavior are sort of this closed set of commandments. And the ethical self is the one that perfectly, without conflict, follows them and obeys them. So I think of that as the kind of abiding picture that philosophy often presents, not just of the self, but of the values that ought to guide it. Nietzsche, who's a cruel critic and very funny in his cruelty, says that philosophers are natural Egyptians. What he means by that is, yes, they mummify everything they value. They kill it and to preserve it, right? And I think that's actually the right image. If they present the picture of us as if we've already been mummified, or if we were to achieve the goals that are held up to us as the right ones, it would be like being, well, still biologically ticking over mummies, right? There'd be vital signs, but actually there wouldn't be change of any really fundamental sort. So when you hear things like the end of history, that's a phrase that you sometimes hear, or heaven, or the revolution of the proletariat, which I mistakenly called the revolution of the bourgeoisie last time, what I was thinking, the revolution of the proletariat for Marx, these are all the end of, as I would say, plot, character, drama, dynamism, and now it's the same old from there on out. Well, why? Well, because we've reached nirvana, we've reached perfection, and now we don't need it. All we want to do is stay there. So connected to these ideas are ideas like the idea of perfection, or good without evil, or perfect happiness, or all of these are images that go along with this picture. The reason-controlled, ethical, moral self, right, is finally in this great virtuous state in which all of its activities are happiness-promoting, a world without end, amen. And I want to oppose that picture basically everywhere, on all the, it moves around, right? You can put that in ethics, you can put it in reason, you can put it in the structure of our character, you can put it in political system, you can move the bump around. And I want to say that it's actually the wrong bump. That's not, we shouldn't be interested in where that bump is. We shouldn't be interested in that bump at all. It's an illusion or a delusion that our values project. Out of our fears and anxieties, so to say, we produce this picture of what it would be like not to have any, and we think, wouldn't that be great? And the answer is no, it would be terrible. Why? Well, because we'd be animated mummies. That's been a word. We'd be driven out of our minds by boredom. And again, Nietzsche is the great articulator of the horrors of some of these things. He says, and in heaven, having alienated all the evil to hell, we're left, he says, with the only evil intrinsic to every paradise, great image, namely boredom. It's a great bit of working through on Nietzsche's part that we actually need change, excitement. These are not bad, and with them goes risk of things going wrong, all kinds of things. So we want, and I want to produce the sort of the notion of the creative tension. Right? We want a creative tension in our values, not everything running over to one side. And we want a supply adaptive self that can negotiate these tensions, understanding that nobody will ever do it forever, that there are always the possibility of tensions we can't negotiate, but to try to escape them by becoming a mummy is actually to just settle for what Coleridge calls death in life. Right? It's not something, that's not what you want, right? That would fail altogether. So what I've tried to do, and what I'm going to be doing a little bit today, Joseph, and then we can move around wherever we want, is to take things that seem to be bad and to show how, what a good role they can have. So jealousy is normally thought to be really bad. We shouldn't be jealous, it's bad, it's unpleasant, we all know that. When you're really jealous, it's not a nice feeling. In fact, that's one of those things you want to push out. But I want to talk about the possibility of an enlivening jealousy, a jealousy that instead of making you want to be more possessive, actually encourages you to be better at keeping the relationship alive. I'll talk about that. And let me start, though, with a couple of the usual sort of parentheses. So I'll just remind you, we looked at, last time we were looking at one, which I think is really a powerful one, of the many different roles that we have to be prepared to play well, all of them requiring not the same set of excellences, but actually quite different ones. So intimacy requires one set of excellences, the public world another, and then there are a whole set of other roles we have. And the idea that somehow there's a way to embody all of these all the time is just a stupid idea. It's impossible because they actually conflict with each other. So what we want is a supply adaptive self, one that can move across these different boundaries, understanding quite fully that they are different and that we have to be a different person, so to speak. Different parts of us have to be highlighted, other parts downplayed, depending on what role we're in. And I like the notion, I don't want to use it in the religious sense, but in the other sense, grace turns out to be a very important value. You don't hear much about it in Plato and Aristotle, and in religious contexts it tends to be something that God gives you. But I want to just talk about it in the ordinary sense in which we talk about someone being graceful, right? As the thought that you need the kind of grace to be able to handle these transitions, even though they can be very difficult to handle. It requires it's not a routinizable skill. It's rather how supply adaptive are you? And the supple adaptivity, right, pulls between, again, two poles. One is security, and the other is change and excitement. You don't want to be so excited that you fall apart. You don't want to be, as you can see happen when you tickle children, for example. If you tickle a child too much, it begins to get hysterical. The kind of laughter and pleasure is too much. It just, you collapse in the face of it. And that's too much, right? And so you don't want to fall apart, but you don't want to be so immune to those kinds of changes and excitements that actually you're already in a kind of narcoleptic state. Animated catalepsy, that's a great phrase, a kind of mummified life, in which you just repeat, but uninvested. And so going together with that, as we were talking about last time, I was talking a little more about today, is the thought that the feelings that you have, the emotions that are generated, somehow don't seem to get to the bottom of you. They seem to, at the last moment, to lose contact with where your intuitive life is, so that really you feel like you're caught in a dull routine. Right? Nothing matters. Let me just read you one little passage about this. It's a great study. That's a great book, by the way. It's not Lady Chatterley's Lover, which is also a great novel of Lawrence's, but this one is an earlier study for it, John Thomas and Lady Jane, which I think is actually slightly better, but, you know, who cares? They're both wonderful. I just want to read you a little bit about that one, and then we'll talk about it. So a little bit of setup. This is taking us back to the child. So imagine a child whose mother, instead of noticing his needs and anxieties, projects her own into him. He's quiescent. She grows anxious. Should he be so quiet? Is there something wrong with him? Unable to contain herself, she fusses with him until he becomes active. the way, if you look at styles of parenting, you can, these are studied across nations. You discover that some nations, the Italians, for example, like a very quiet bambino. So they kind of wrap it up tightly in swaddling clothes. And they really like it if it sleeps a lot and doesn't move around too much. American mothers like active babies, so they kind of prod them into activity. And these all shape a future style of being in the world. How much excitement do you need? How quiescent can you be, right? How can you tolerate it? So, right, she fusses when the baby doesn't. Maybe there's something wrong with it. Maybe he's dead. Maybe he's, right, okay. I need to get reassured that he's still alive in there. Another scenario, she sees his nascent wishes and desires not as things to be cultivated, developed, and explored, not as opportunities to get to know him, but as levers by means of which he can be controlled and made responsive to her desires. You can have that, but only if you do this. We've all seen and experienced, no doubt about it. In each case, her desires override his. In each, an opportunity is created for him to experience her love, her capacity to acknowledge and respond appropriately to his feelings and desires as inadequate. Right? She's not responding, it's not registering what I want, need. She's getting me to do what she wants. Right? He may then say to himself, as it were, I cannot trust my mother's love, therefore I will love myself. Where the mother ought to be in his love, then he finds himself. This is clinical, or the beginning of narcissism. The narcissist is someone who doesn't trust other people to love him. So he loves himself instead. He replaces the inadequate lover with his own capacity. He's better at it. Yet for all that, he isn't in a position to love himself successfully. Right? He's only a little child. He hasn't achieved the sort of autonomy his response to his mother projects. He cannot satisfy his own desires and needs or assuage his own anxieties and pains. He cannot even be confident that what he interprets as a failure in his mother isn't a failure in himself. Maybe she doesn't love him because there's something wrong with him, because he's unlovable. So he continues to crave her love, as he will later crave admiration, to shore up the fragile self that is in two ways failing him. Right? So he is not able to play the successful role. And now when he replays love, this drama gets replayed, right? Then sure we don't know people or aren't these people ourselves. Everyone has some elements of this, right? Even though most of us, it isn't the dominant style of our love. To the degree that he feels his desires and anxieties without being able to do anything about them, he experiences them as threats to his own comforting fantasy of omnipotent autonomy, as things to defend himself against. Not to feel them has become a desideratum, so that instead of being things he can comfortably feel, they become threats because now he can't satisfy them. If the defense succeeds, the place where feelings should occur in him contains only perhaps confused thoughts. So when your feelings become things you defend yourself against because you can't satisfy them, right? Then, right, if you're successful in defending yourself against them, instead of feeling your feelings, they just become confused thoughts. Right? You're succeeded in anesthetizing yourself. Right? And again, that's something that to some extent we all do with some of our feelings. Narcissism is itself a liability that accompanies love. But what it gives rise to, at least in the sort of case we've imagined, is a liability that accompanies emotions more generally, namely hollowness. So this is now trying to make sense of how you can have feelings that you don't feel. So this is a real issue. You can test it. But men especially are subject to this. And you can, if you look at the little story I told you, you can sort of see one of the reasons why they might be, right? Which is they have to separate themselves from their mother and achieve a kind of independence, perhaps way before they're able to fully do this. So their feelings, instead of being things that they encourage, will become liabilities, or worries that they need somebody else, and these are threats that need to be kept in place. And this is, the notion now is the thought of how do you explain what hollow feelings are. This is an attempt to explain that. And this is the condition of Clifford Chatterley's Aunt Ava in Lawrence's John Thomas and Lady Jane. It's a great description of what hollowness is like, I think. At the middle of her, she had no feelings at all. She didn't even know that at the center anyone could have feelings. She thought that the core of everybody was quite hard and quite without feeling, as every crystal is centered upon a grain of cold dust. Only, of course, the way you were elaborated upon this center of nothingness mattered. It was that which established your quality. In her 60s, her husband dead for 5 years, Eva recognizes what this has meant for her life. It seems to me, she says, as if all the years I lived with him had never been real. Oh, it was wonderful, yet it doesn't seem any more real to me now than a cigarette was. It's a remarkable description, I think, and you can feel that about your life. You can feel, as you look back on it, that it was like that. And part of the explanation that I'm suggesting is that a certain kind of thing has gone wrong with the development of your feelings, so that you've anesthetized yourself against them, and now you can't feel them anymore. Right? They become, as I say, confused thoughts rather than things you feel, and so they don't grow up and develop, right, emotion. You don't grow up and develop emotionally in those areas. And as a result, when you try to have those feelings for other people, you find that all you can have is kind of empty feelings. As she says, the way you're elaborated on this empty center becomes the really important thing. But then when you see what that elaboration is built on, you realize that the emotional foundations of it have been kind of poisoned. And Eva's sense of unreality is a symptom of a disconnection between her feelings and the core on which they're elaborated. A disconnection she represents as a feature of the core itself. To be jealous of someone, for example, we typically have to think something like, he's getting love from my lover that I should be getting, or he is a threat to the love that is rightly mine. But if that's all jealousy amounts to in us, that thought, it's hollow. And what makes it so is that the adult thoughts that are elements of it have come apart from the embryonic ones, which should also be present. This might be because we've developed potent narcissistic defenses, or learned too well to be stoical. In either case, something has gone wrong. We're inured to a certain sort of pain. We don't feel it, but we've paid too high a price. Like Aunt Eva, right, we've become cut off from a source of joy and energy that life is gray and chilly without. And let me read you again just this last thought from O'Phelan. And I think artists and thinkers like that sort are far better guides sometimes these things than philosophers are. Because philosophers have one set of defenses, right? And they you know what they are now, right? They're the rational, intellectual defenses, right? They love to turn everything into an intellectual problem. But many problems are not intellectual problems. Aunt Eva's problem is not one you can solve by thinking, right? That's a different problem and requires a different response. This is O'Phelan again from his autobiography. I have to go on writing, waiting, and watching for the appearance within me of the theme that leads the writer into his cave to talk to himself when young, to say, this is what you dreamed as a boy. There's no break, no passing, just a larger shape, a more human, a more complex form. If once the boy within us ceases to speak to the man who enfolds him, the shape of life is broken and there is literally no more to be said. In Aunt Eva's cave, the girl still speaks, but nothing she says is intelligible to the enfolding woman, whose life in consequence seems hollow at its core. That's the parameter of this problem of emptiness. I hope I've managed to persuade you that it's a real phenomenon, and that it's one that's very important to the idea. I think when Henry James says, live, it's a mistake not to, right? He's talking about this. He's not saying, biologically take over or go and have a lot of adventures. He's saying it's a mistake not to have your feelings, right? Be invested fully in your life, so that your sense of whatever it is you're doing, however exciting it might be, is cut off. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like I like the image of the cigarette being smoked is like a good one, and I think like a good one to try to tense our practice of life against.
Yeah.
And the inverse or the opposite of that, I think, is someone like Proust. for whom like there isn't like it's not as if there's an end. It's an always like an eternal return
Yeah.
kind of thing.
So I would take us back to the beginning of the chapter on the jealousy that you see explored by Sartre and capturing, or not Proust so much, but the narrator of Otto Recherche du Temps Perdu. Yeah. There was a curious, maybe we could talk about that a little bit. I won't read it, I'll just remind you a little bit of it. So Proust's thought is that all love is an attempt to do the impossible. And therefore it's bound to be frustrated. It's the desire, he thinks, to possess the other in their freedom. That is, for them to at once to be free, and therefore not under your control, and yet to be possessed by you, and so controlled by you. And it's a, but can't have that. Right? And the image of possession, which he thinks, there's a way in which I think for Sartre, all love is pathological. It's all, there's no good love. Love is an attempt to do the impossible, to co-opt, to turn somebody into a kind of free slave. Right? You can't do that. And he thinks, therefore, what jealousy is crucial to it. So there's bound to be jealousy because there's failure of possession. And jealousy is ignited precisely by the thought that you don't fully possess. That somebody, that your beloved has other interests, or loves somebody else, or is giving something to somebody else that you should have. And that you're caught in a dialectic, an insufferable dialectic of jealousy. But I think that paints jealousy into dark or too bad a color, because jealousy can enliven romance. In just the way I think that we often forget the tantalizing, teasing, and flirting, all of which can be painful, but can also revivify or enliven. So when you discover, for example, that someone else is romantically interested in your beloved, or that she or he is romantically interested in someone else, it needn't be a disaster. It can actually encourage you to, maybe you've been backsliding, you haven't been attentive enough, you see needs that you didn't fully register. These can be occasions to do something, not simply to get angry or to lock your beloved up, right, which is the natural tendency of a Sartrean lover or a Proustian one, is to, make Albertine a prisoner. It's one of the novels in the Otto Recherche du Temps Perdu is Prisonnière, when Albertine becomes essentially secluded. So what do you think about that sort of way of thinking about?
That seems like if you're motivated to love better because you're feeling jealous, I think that sounds more like a competition with yourself than an outward relationship with somebody else. If you're thinking like, oh no, I'm not doing well enough, I need to pick it up because I need to prove to myself that I am lovable and I can win that back, then it doesn't seem like you're doing it because of the qualities in the person that you want to love.
Well, as you describe it, that seems right. Yeah. That is, so there are no doubt many scenarios that jealousy could ignite. So the one that you imagine is one that is directed towards me, the jealous lover, who thinks that, I've got to become something, right, in order to win back my beloved. But a different one, right, a similar possibility is that I want to preserve the relationship. And the other person needs something from me. It's not about me necessarily changing. It's about the other getting something from me that they weren't getting before. So the focus you're right, the focus could be on you. So you kind of a narcissistic response to jealousy, right? Which could be like this, right? I mean, so think about the case where what jealousy provokes is a duel. We've gotten over this, but that's only recent, right? At the end of the 19th century, men were still killing each other out of jealousy, right? The thought was, what does the duel do? The duel establishes my superiority, right? You see, you were stupid to love that other guy, but now he's dead, right? Killed by moi. So now get back on board. I'm better. You should love me more. That's one response. That's not about the other person, right? That's about your preeminence. Another one, though, is a different response to jealousy, is that it's a wake-up call to you to do better by your beloved than you were doing. And that of course may involve you changing, but it's not motivated by your preeminence. It's motivated by the other's needs. Yeah.
It seems like to me that that jealousy makes sense as a response to what you said with
Yeah.
if a need's not being
Yeah.
met, or
Yeah.
if your lover is
Yeah.
looking elsewhere, etc. But I feel like you could have jealous responses to others. Like for instance, it's not that maybe a need isn't being met per se, but you just see your loved one do something that's not wrong, or that's not reflecting anything bad of your own past relation, but so perhaps it's just more irrational.
Well, not necessarily. It may be that the other person was misbehaving. I mean, it may not be. So sometimes it's the carelessness of the other that needs to be addressed. Right? So maybe they're not giving the proper weight to the relationship. Maybe they're having a little fantasy of excitement and newness and their own attractiveness and their capacity to seduce, and they've forgotten that they're actually in a relationship that's very important to them, and they need to be reminded of it. So it needn't. If you think the focus is on the relationship, who does what to whom to preserve it is not scripted. Right? It may well be that this is dangerous play with something, and the other needs to be reminded that there are dangers involved. You're not unaware of what's happening, and it can be an invitation to exploration. What is it that I'm not doing something, or is it just that you need some excitement? And notice, by the way, that one of the possibilities is that you start having an open relationship, right? You think, okay, so we need excitement, and the excitement can be a threat if I close it off. I say, no, you can't do that. Then I say it's either that or me, right? But if I say, you need some excitement, and it's, you just need a new lover for a while, you need to be the center of a little romance, maybe we can handle that. That's quite different, right? That says the relationship is going to change to accommodate, it's not going to be broken. Now, all of these things are much easier in theory than they are in practice. This just articulates a sphere. But actually, when you experience jealousy, your brain goes black and you become a nasty, aggressive person a lot of the time. So it's not as if, this says these are possibilities for jealousy to play a different role, not that it'll be easy to get it to do that. Yeah?
I feel like it also ties back, and you sort of touched on this, the idea of that balance between security and calming your anxieties, but it not being necessarily boring and stagnant, and especially if you look at someone else being interested in your partner, and the jealousy, I think, to a lesser extent that brings up than if your partner is the one interested in someone else, then I feel like in a way that it poses a slight risk, but it feels like a safer risk almost, and less of one, that if anything it sort of ignites that excitement again, and then you may be more drawn to your partner.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think no doubt about it, as everyone knows, much easier to find someone to be in a relationship with if you're already in a relationship with someone. Why? Well, people who are already in relationships seem more successful at this, right? They're not desperate. You don't get that feeling. It's like, oh, he's desperate to lose her. I can't find anybody. There's a whole set of not very attractive, but things we all do that are about the economy of who's available and who isn't and what it means, right? So people that everybody wants, right? And people that nobody wants. Right? These are poles within which we have to negotiate this sort of thing. I agree that when it's not the beloved's fault, it's somebody else's interest, that's a different one. It can even be that you sort of this I take it as the idea of trophy wives, is other people are supposed to envy you for having such a hot chick to be your wife, right? And if it didn't, if everybody thought, okay, you'd need to get another one, right? Because this one's not working very well, right? Yeah, so that's a different but related phenomenon. Yeah. Did I see you?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a very substantive point. Just that, there seem to be so many iterations of how jealousy can manifest, and in my personal experience, it can be, as you said, with the mother and the child, born of a projection of anxiety that actually doesn't end up in the way you described, propelling self-improvement or care
Yeah,
or
I agree with
reimagining
that.
the
Yeah.
relationship, but rather like
Repetition.
stunting
Yeah.
the like growth or preventing the like full
Yeah.
complete well-being of
No,
your partner.
no question. I agree completely with that.
Yeah.
I think when we want to think about the role of different emotions in our lives, we have to think of them as differently, playing different roles in different psychological sets. So jealousy, so for example, as I think there's a kind of jealousy which has its roots in these early experiences, which is essentially this: I'm unlovable, and therefore, right, I'm bound to be caught up in a sort of attitude to the love of others that's anxious and jealous of their capacity to do it. So it's not as if all jealousy in everyone is something that can play these different roles, where some of us, it's impossible. It's just intolerable. We can only be in a relationship with someone who never does that, who never excites our jealousy, because we are unable to control it. I think Proust is like that. The difference is that Proust is able to turn his inability to successfully love another person into his capacity to create a great novel. It's not, the worst is not always a bad thing. Freud is right, and to some extent he might be, right? We compensate in imagination for these things we can't accomplish in reality, and some of that compensation takes the form of creating great works of art. So it's not always a loss, in some sense. It can also be a compensated for loss. We can do something to make up for it, as we all do. When we dream or daydream or have little fantasies about how the world will go, we're compensating ourselves for a reality that's not facing up, not working out for us. But it helps us to negotiate the world if we can give ourselves little moments of these kinds of not entirely justified pleasure, but very important. Art exists so that the bow shall not break. Think how much time we spend in the realm of fantasy, watching films, watching television, reading novels, looking at stuff on our iPhones, just flipping into a realm of that's not the one we're actually in. And maybe with virtual reality, there'll be far more with us. We'll be able to, avatars will become almost as important to us as the selves we are. This can seem like you can feel as a real threat, right? But you can also feel it as freeing. Maybe I can't in reality play these roles, but I can construct an avatar who can play these roles, and I can be almost as invested in the avatar as I am in myself. Not saying, why get excited about biology when it turns out that biological systems are just one of a very general class of complex systems. Maybe you could get your mind around that. That's part of what's going on in Blade Runner, right? True, the avatars happen to be made out of fleshy materials, but they're avatars in some sense too, right? Yeah.
I was wondering if we could unpack a little
Yeah.
bit more what it looks like to possess a person or like an agent even. Just because it seems like something about that possession requires like choice on the part of the agent. It seems as if like
Great, yeah.
like if there is no more choice and there's like this inanimacy, it's like no longer the type of possession we're interested in. And it seems to like go in this circle, I guess, where I guess this comes down from this thing, we love only what we do not wholly possess,
Yeah.
which is tied up in desire.
Yeah, so that's a Platonic picture of desire. Right? Notice how easily Diotima, I'm talking about happiness, we want to have good things be ours forever, as if the verb, the having part, is doing a big part of the work. They never focuses on that again. But there are things whose value you can't possess, you can't achieve by possessing them. So think of looking at a great painting, for example, in an art museum. The mode of your appreciation of it is, the aesthetic mode of appreciation is not a form of possession. It's a form of exploration, of recognizing otherness, of a whole set of things that go on in watching. So the idea of owning or possession fits with a set of emotions like anxiety about loss that makes you think that you could actually have it in such a way that it wouldn't produce that anxiety. So it's a fantasy, right? The other part, I think, too, the other part of the fantasy is that you're a good jailer. I mean, it's very easy to leave this out. So Proust himself turns out not to be a very good jailer, right? So, or Marcel, rather, the narrator, turns out not to be a very good jailer. So the thought would be, I'm confident. Here, let me give a very simple example of the comment. I'm confident that I'm suited to eternity. That is, most people who think they'll be saved or damned don't ask themselves, right, are they the sorts of things for whom eternity would be a good thing? They just sort of assume that they are, right? And part of it, there's a backstory about the soul and so forth that we seldom fill out. But a different one would be that we're not the kinds of beings who are suited for eternity. And one of the ways would be this, right? We need excitement, risk, change. And without, remember that passage I read you from Aristotle, which is one of my favorite ones, right? Because it's so bizarre, which is that, you know, we'd be better off if we wanted only one thing, and we could just have that one thing, and that would be the end of the story, like God. And then he says, yeah, but we're not like that. We get bored, we get tired. And that's a liability, right? If we were gods, we wouldn't get bored, we wouldn't get tired, and you think, but then we wouldn't get creative, then we wouldn't, there would be no art. You know the famous poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make them tree, that everybody at some point encounters. But the flip side of that is God can make trees, but he can't write poems. Why? Well, because poems don't emanate from the place where God is, right? They emanate from this other place where we are. No tragedy, no great art, no... Heaven starts to sound awfully depleted. There's just one game in town. It's a perfect one, true, and you got to look at it, evidently, reassuringly forever. But I don't, that strikes me as just not something I want. I don't think we'd be happy with that at all. We'd be caught on, it would be boring. I don't think we should face up. There's sort of two sides, right? One is possessing the freedom of the other, but thinking about our own freedom. Right? So I can't, in there somewhere in Lost Confucius, I talk about the sadism, you know, the sadomasochist who wants to possess most beloved, and all he wants to do is go tire up and all these different kinds of things. And once he's done that, it moves on to another one, does the same thing to that, so to speak. And what it leaves out, I think, is this thought, right? So you think this way, right? When I get to heaven, all my loved ones will be there. A lot of people often think that. Mama, Papa, right? Everything. Grandparents are great. All those people I've lost, they'll be returned to me. But what you leave out is the fact that if they're free beings in heaven, they could stop loving you there too, right? Or you could stop loving them, right? Yes, Mom, but really, look, the first 100,000 years were great, but, you know, I'm sick of you now, okay? So just move over to another part of heaven. I want something else. You can't get rid of that risk and keep freedom about yourself either. So you don't think that you'll change, but that characteristic is just what happens, right? You possess, now that you possess, right, and the other has assured you of possession, you think, oh, damn it, I want somebody else now, I'm bored with you. You're possessed. I want to get somebody new. Yeah.
I'm probably wrong, but it feels to me, I don't want to go there, like we're not maybe getting to the, we're not looking at it from the right point of view. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Probably I'm wrong. So why not to look at it? I think we started from evolutionary point of view at jealousy. So here's the blue-footed booby showing his blue food, and some other bird's food is bluer. And so the eggs are expensive, the sperm is cheap.
Well, I think that they're
So-
not inconsistent.
No,
I mean,
no.
but the point is that unlike the blue-footed booby, and this is where everything gets simultaneously interesting and difficult, is that we don't have one goal anymore. We're not busy trying to get as many copies of ourselves into the next generation. And that's in part, it's in part that evolution doesn't script a life for us. We can't think, we can't sort of think, I'm in line with, evolution's goals. And as soon as we think that, then the very idea of, what for the blue-footed booby is a simple love story. It's just this and yes or no. That's the end of
Yeah,
love
but
story.
the next thing is then when you look at Proust and he's saying that all love is pathological,
Yeah.
he has a very good thought there because, or maybe it's coming from there, the humans have to be somehow equal, and when the woman is on a very unequal status, and in the time of Proust,
Yeah.
of course she's going to do all kind of things to
Well,
make
yeah.
herself more important, and and
I think,
make
I think
life
the
miserable.
lower status wasn't, was correlated with only one kind of lower importance. Husbands felt just as men do now, the loss or threat of
Well, you
their-
can't on the one side could be suffering. Both should be.
Hmm?
Both are suffering, right?
Well, I agree. Yeah, I agree. But I don't see why you think that taking an evolutionary point of view is going to solve anything.
No, understanding. Maybe it's not going to
Yeah.
solve, but I think if we start from there, maybe no.
But no, I think we should start from there. But then we'll end up where we are now. We'll end up talking about the roles that these things play and the inner lives of socialized beings like us. We won't get around that. Go on.
So if if jealousy is a competition, and you always look for something that could be better, then from there.
You mean if jealousy is ignited by this, that
But-
each of the beloveds is looking for a better match.
Right,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah, but I think that for the blue-footed booby, right, the notion of a better match is simply the notion of better genetic fitness. But for us, what a better match is no more scripted or clear than who we are who are looking for the better match, right? So it's not as if we come equipped, we don't know ourselves well enough to be able to sort of say, this is what I need. A new love can teach you a whole lot of things that you need that you didn't know you needed at all. That's part of the inner richness of beings like us relative to the blue-footed booby, is that we're the heroes or actors in a huge number of different stories, none of which simply just track one another. We're not, so the answer to Socrates' question at the beginning of the Phaedrus, am I a simple being or a complicated one, is we're very complicated beings. And we're very complicated in part because of our evolutionary history, which results from the layering on top of our reptilian brain, our mammalian brain, and on top of that, our frontal lobes. All of these were autonomous brains. They ran creatures, right? They weren't parts of brains. The reptiles were able to get around. We have aspects of ourselves that are all of these things. We're not made in God's image. There's no reason to think there's a happy way to put all this together. We're an experiment in life, and it may be that we're going to be, as all experiments in life fail in the end, we'll fail too, but just why we will is we don't know yet. Yeah.
Just to articulate some confusion,
Yeah.
it just seems so complicated that part of this need to possess, and I think also this came up when we were talking
Yeah.
about God wanting, everybody to love him, is like we want our agent or our partner to kind of freely and autonomously consent to being possessed by us.
Yeah.
And then we talked about how the patriarchal system we live in at least seems to exclude that option for women in very many ways. And how just if we don't know ourselves well enough to know what we want, and we've been conditioned from childhood, whether it be by mommy issues or some larger social structure, it seems just an impossible project to be in a relationship where you know yourself and you know your partner.
Well, that's
you know what you want.
impossible.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
So what do we do?
but it's not even desirable, so thank goodness it's not possible.
But like
what-
it's a little desirable.
Well, I know, I think that the way we, see, the thing is, we look at polls, but the polls are seldom where we are. That's kind of, so we have not perfect knowledge, but better than ignorance, right? And a different way to look at it is, what we're able to do, what we're doing, is we're thinking about the overall shape of these things. Which issues are real issues in a relationship are not the whole gamut of theoretical possibilities that we're looking at. They're only a certain subset of them. Even that subset is pretty daunting, but that's part of what it is to be a living, vibrant being, is that you're well enough able to handle enough of these to have enough. That's as good as it gets. And we can't expect that we're going to have the kinds of, or shouldn't want the kinds of relationships that will simply survive or be guaranteed to survive if the social world around us or the natural world radically changes. I always say we're not off-the-road vehicles. We are nice little suburban cars. We're developed for a good highway system, lots of gasoline stations, lots of mechanics and things all around the place. Take those away, and we're not very good. We depend on massive complex systems to keep the kind of equilibrium, imperfect, risky, potentially disturbable, that we've got. But look around you. It's not as bad as you might think it would be, given the... So we can have great relationships and wonderful lives, despite the fact that we're not living out. The way we're having them is not by living out these bad theories. Those misrepresent the kinds of lives that we have. They oversimplify and present us with false images of ourselves. That's the...
In the other class, for which I can learn at Nicomachean Ethics and tons of Shakespeare, we're just talking about knowing thyself a lot.
Yeah.
And, does this character know themselves?
Yeah.
And in case of Brutus or King Henry IV or whatever, this is what leads to these deep-seated errors. And I get that it's drama and it plays out themes of the human condition in a augmented, intensified form. But I'm having trouble forgiving my own human shortcoming in the fact that I will probably never know myself, because I feel I should at least get that down and then move out into the world and try to interact with
I see that,
people.
but it's a mistake, right? Think about it slightly differently. Think about knowing yourself not as being able to write the perfect autobiography that gets everything right. I'm thinking about knowing yourself as itself far more fragmentary and use-related. So it's not okay, so today we're going to start knowing ourselves, right? And at the end of the class, we'll know ourselves, so that'll be handy.
That's what I said to myself here.
Well, here's a great line of Nietzsche's about this. Only a galley slave could know himself.
Yeah, everyone's been quoting this at me lately.
Yeah, well, it's a good. So, the thought is, if you know that every single day of your life you're going to be shackled to an oar, rowing it backwards and forwards across the Mediterranean, then what you can think is, I'm someone who rows it by galley, right? And that'll be it. Not because there isn't a lot more to you, but because the world has narrowed your options down to a very small number of things.
But sorry, aren't our options pretty limited anyway?
Isn't that great? I mean, suppose they were unlimited. That would be too much for us. That's like all the soap powders, right? That's just too many for us. So what we end up doing is tossing a coin, because we have lost our capacity to make any decision. So we can be overwhelmed by too many possibilities. So we want to think this, but actually life is not like that either. Most of the time, right, it's a pretty narrow range. And, we're not being asked to make choices, from just a dizzying array of things. We're in situ, we're here, these are the people we know, these are the options in a world like ours. They're not absolute, but they tend to, make it more manageable.
But okay, so just also like I've been thinking about the legend of like Prometheus a lot
Yeah.
recently, and like taking like how humans, if you
Yeah.
imagine, has like used to know the day that they would die,
Yeah.
but now we're kind of under this illusion of our own immortality, and like we act,
are?
and I think we are. I
Yeah.
think we don't live with the idea that like we're all terminal, like we all have it. I try to tell myself every day that I'm gonna die, but like it's hard to like really like grasp that. I feel like.
Just write it on your mirror in the bathroom, you're gonna die, and then underneath it, right, you must change your life, and that you'll be fine. Well, then you won't have to think about it anymore. You'll have done, the mirror will have done the work.
It just
for
seems
you.
kind of backwards because like I'm so deeply persuaded, as if I wasn't really enticed by heaven before. Like I
Yeah.
get this like forever and immortality thing is not actually that appealing to like the human condition.
Yeah.
But now that we act as if we had like all the time and all the options, and we
Well, that's a slightly different question. I agree with part of that. So when people like Heidegger and so on say, death is the ultimate horizon of life, remember it. It's really important. That does seem right. It does seem right to the fact that we are finite gives a very different value to all of the things that we do. You might think of it as you've got so many minutes in the bank, and you can't replace them, and it's a finite number. That's right. But having said that, the next step is, what does that do to all of the other values? It tells you, well, things like don't throw your life away, you won't get another one, right? A whole lot of stuff like that. I think there's but frankly, seems to me that this is, again, it's the thing, Wittgenstein says this, the problem of the meaning of life is solved when the problem never arises. Now, when you're not busy asking yourself, what is the meaning of life? Right? Your life is too busy and too much fun for you to be sitting around worried about its meaning. And that seems to me to be the desirable state. And in the same way, I think about death, having registered that, don't waste your time. Right? I wasted time, and now doth time waste me. Again, back to your Shakespearean history plays. Yes, don't do that. But to think that you're going to improve anything by endlessly thinking about that fact seems wrong. That having registered it and having it woven into some of your life plans, you've done all that one could reasonably do about it. Now the thing to do is to get on with your life. Since, after all, you only have a certain amount of it. Why waste it on worried about the fact that that's not eternal? Especially when, as I'm arguing, eternal life would be awful. Nothing. Again, this is another thing Wittgenstein says about eternity. He says, how do people think that the problem of the meaning of life would be solved by the discovery that it went on forever?
Yeah.
And it just seems like one of those great thoughts. I saw you were worried about the life have meaning. Don't worry, life goes on forever. And now I'm supposed to feel better about that? It's a bit like you were worried about imprisonment. Well, don't worry about it, it goes on forever. It seems worse, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so to respond to Lily, like some of my favorite lines.
You guys are not going to fight with each other.
No,
we're
Okay. Are you in
I don't think we're never on
amicable?
bad
We're not on
Okay.
bad terms.
Okay, go
Good
on.
times. Talk about it.
Yeah.
Some of my favorite lines that I think really good at this are, "Death is the mother."
Slowly.
I know this is.
Yeah.
I should take a public speaking class.
I'm just going to, actually, I think we need to have speed control on you.
Yeah, that would be really. If
Style.
you could install
Kind of
that,
dial it
go
down,
for it. I feel
right?
like it would make me a much better student
Yeah.
immediately. But death is the mother of beauty, hence from her alone shall come fulfillment of our dreams and desires, which is from a Walt Stevens poem called Sunday Morning. And like the point that he makes is that like his image is like he asks, do the rivers in heaven, eternally like ever find?
Yeah.
Like, they search for seas and never find.
Yeah.
Like, does fruit hang in the cloudless sky endlessly and never fall? And his like kind of spiritual way of like turning like poetry into something that takes the place of it, like Christian eternity or that kind of thing, is that it's like kind of these.
Go back.
It's like the way he uses poetry to kind of take a poetry bounded by death, to take the place of kind of Christian eternity. Like it ends up being this kind of rich experience of like spring and like wet roads and birds and that kind of thing. And like this is the like not eternity, but this kind of true.
Yeah, I think that's I think Wallace Stevens is a great antidote to the pleasures of eternity, because he reminds us of all the pleasures that won't be there, like the ripening of fruit, right? The kinds of things that, I see, remember the end of Sunday morning, it was great. We live in an old chaos of the sun, or island solitude, unsponsored, free of that wide water inescapable. Deer walk upon our mountain, and the birds whistle about us their spontaneous cries. Sweet berries ripen in the wilderness, and in the isolation of the sky at evening, casual flocks of pigeons make ambiguous undulations as they sink downward to darkness like extended wings. It's amazing. You know, you read that and you think, how great it is to be in a world that actually, where ripe berries ripen and casual pigeons make casual undulations and the sea comes in and people die, and those things are not available in power. How dare they wear our colors there? That's a way that I think Stevens is one of the great poets of immanence. The pleasures of evanescent things, which is very important to, again, an antidote to the thought that, right, everything good, as Plato says, that things that last forever are better than things that last for a short time. And all you have to do is sort of just think about that for a while to realize how stupid it is. It's just not a good thought, right? That everything is better if it lasts longer. Some things are. But, imagine, for example, if you thought, well, Wagner operas are just not long enough. Right? I mean, you really, the really great one is the one that goes on forever. Right? And then you can think that about nearly everything else.
Doesn't it, the point presupposes that the world we live is like good and perfect, and it seems to be that way. It's like it's good already in the nature.
No, it doesn't tell you that. It tells you that there are beautiful things in the world that are beautiful in part because they're evanescent, and that those will be lost in eternity. He said, one of the other lines, this is from Esthétique du Mal, I think, where he says, who would want to lose sight for all the ill it sees? Even though we see lots of terrible things, who would want to give
What about the slave in the galley?
What about the slave in the damn galley?
What about him?
Yeah.
Because he might not think that.
Nobody thinks for a minute that life is all hunky-dory. The point of the poem is not to tell you live in paradise already. Because that paradisical picture, in which nobody's a slave in a galley, is not actually, he's not leaving in disgust. He just told me he needed to leave early. The slave in the terrible things happen on earth, and life can be not worth living, right? The point is not to deny that. The point is to remind you that many of the things that make life worth living are temporary things that wouldn't be available in eternity. And I think that's very important to keep in mind, right? That many of the joys and pleasures, the things that make us happiest, that keep us involved in our lives, are things that, part of whose value is that they are evanescent and temporary. Yeah.
So I definitely understand why we don't want, our lives to be perfect or without change, and that in that sense, in this world, eternity is a very
Perfect. And what is the sense now?
In this world, eternity is not attractive to us. But
well, you and me maybe, but a lot of people find it very attractive.
But when you think about it,
just the people you wouldn't want to spend the rest of your life with,
but when we discuss heaven, isn't that inherently not human or worldly, and so could our desires
So the thought is,
change?
do we want a better world? Could we have a better world? Don't we want a better world here? Is that the
Not
No.
quite. Sort of like, we wouldn't want everything perfect here, because I think sort of our human desires and our human nature is to want that interest and that change. But when we die, assuming there's a heaven and an afterlife, I don't think we would necessarily be the same, like, worldly humans, so in that sense,
Yeah, I
would our
agree with that.
desires change?
Yeah, no, I
and
agree with
then-
that. That would be just our rational self enjoying the beatific vision world without it. But notice that that presupposes that there is such a thing as the rational self, or the soul that's somehow us but not us. And all the thinkers that we were looking at, Plato, Aristotle, Kant, they all think that. They all think that there's a divine part to us, and that we'll just, as we say, shuffle off these mortal coils, and then that'll be us but not us, right? And that's, as I think, that's just the flip side of, right? So the thing that's going to enjoy eternity has to be the kind of thing that will enjoy eternity. You can't have one without the other. But each of these seems to me to be a false story. Right? So there's no such thing as the soul, self, rational part. I will enjoy that. And in a way, I think I would want to say something like, and if there is and it does, yeah, what is that to me? Right? That would be a way to respond to it. Right? Maybe that's true. Angels may enjoy this kind of thing, and maybe there's a little part of me that's angelic. But I don't think that helps us to think about the issues of our lives. That's just a kind of like, and then, right, but it doesn't really say, that's what it's all about, that's what we really want, that's where we're really going, that'll be the best thing for us. That might be the best thing for somebody else. Well, it's not going to be good for us. Why? Well, because we are these divided, complicated creatures. We do like excitement and change. And moreover, we're lucky, because excitement and change are really good things. And creativity and great works of art and great works of imagination, all of which are the products of our fragmentation, these are some of the best things in life. So get rid of them, and that's a massive depletion. There's Wallace Stevens' evanescent goods, but that's a huge class of goods, right? All of Shakespeare's plays, all of Mozart's symphonies, all of Wagner's operas, all of Proust's, everything. That would all not be there. That would be awful, right? As I say, think of the kinds of beings that would be in eternity and ask yourself, you'd want to spend eternity with them. Now, a different question, I thought this is where you were going, and I agree with this. That's quite different from thinking about things like, how do we make life better? Of course we're committed to that, right, in all sorts of ways. Even if we're not always sure that the things we think are going to make it better will in fact end up making it so. But when we see people oppressed or suffering, we don't think, and shouldn't think, I wonder if this will be really good in the long term. As Maynard Keynes says, in the long term, we're all bad. So we don't want, we have to have a divided vision in which we simultaneously are triaging, trying to make things a little better here, investing in the long term, knowing that we have good evidence that all of our social engineering and planning are just as likely to have bad consequences that we haven't foreseen as good ones. But we are the kinds of beings who, when they do the best we can, often don't do terribly well. But there's no alternative, right? Not like, so we should do better than the best we can. We got another great Wittgensteinian line. He said, when you build boilers to the best engineering principle,